We are recording and looks like we're all set. So good evening, friends. I'm Sarah Vetter with the library's community engagement team, and welcome to tonight's program, which is part 2 of our brain health series, Hold That Thought. So have you ever walked into a room and then completely forgotten why you went in there? Happens to me a lot, almost daily, it seems. But tonight we're going to learn about the memory process and also pick up a few strategies that we can use for retaining that information in our good old noggins. So our presenter tonight is Molly Hofer. Molly is a family life educator with University of Illinois Extension. Hey, Molly, how are you?
Good, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So why are we here again? I already forgot. Just
Right.
kidding.
Now, will we be able to see the other faces, everybody's face, or is
No,
it
usually they're the videos.
they're hidden? Okay,
Yeah, typically I might be
it's
able to
okay. I
come
just
up.
wanted to make sure.
We could have them turn on their video later if they have comments or you want to see everybody
Okay.
in
Yeah, because
person.
I don't see any other squares. I just see you and you.
Sure, and I'm going to go away now so you can carry on and do your thing.
Okie doke.
Thanks so much.
Let me try to share my screen. Slideshow from current slide. Okay. Of course, it was at the end. Can you see it okay, Sarah?
Yes, I can, Molly.
Okay, perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be back with you. If you were part of my program last month, glad you were there. If you're new this evening and you're listening for the first time, you won't miss anything because I do a 2-minute review of what we talked about last time in this lesson and in next month's lesson because what I presented the first month was on the brain health contributing factors, and that is probably one of the key features of talking about brain health and aging. So I do like to repeat it each time, but of course, shorter tonight versus last month. Tonight's program is called Hold That Thought, and it is a talk on memory and aging. It's I think you'll find it interesting. I do ask that you have pen and paper handy because we do a couple of little activities together. I will also ask you to write answers in the chat box occasionally, and if you would like to do that, I would love it if you did want to do that because then we can share responses with each other. Otherwise, it's hard to have a discussion virtually. So we'll do it, and you can certainly unmute and ask a question too, if that's what you'd like to do. So I'm going to start by asking a rhetorical question. Have you ever reminded a child to hang up a coat? Have you yourselves ever said the words, I forgot? Chances are you might have even said that today because forgetfulness is common throughout life. We are all forgetful and we've all been forgetful throughout life. When we're younger, we don't really worry about it at all. If I left my jacket at my girlfriend's house 6 doors down when I was a kid, I got it the next time I was over there. I never even thought about it again. But sometimes as we grow up and grow older, when we do have episodes of what researchers call benign forgetfulness. It's the type of forgetfulness that's ordinary. It doesn't necessarily hurt us. It doesn't necessarily help us. When we do forget that jacket, or we say we were going to bring an appetizer to the luncheon and we made the appetizer and left it on the counter. These are the things I'm talking about. Sometimes as we age, we worry about these things that really have happened throughout our lives. And as I give every brain health talk at the very beginning, I always say, if you are worried about someone you love, if you're worried about yourself, if you think, oh, I don't know, I don't know if it's that, I don't know what it is. I do absolutely advocate that you talk to your doctor about it and have that conversation with him or her and to to give yourself peace of mind and to get down to business as far as what might be troubling you. Okay, so let's move along here. Tonight, over the next hour, we will meet until 7:30, and we are going over that hour to talk about different types of memory. I told you tonight's program is on memory and aging, so we will talk about several different types of memory. We will talk for a minute about some of those lifestyle choices that we make that are good for the brain and good for the body, or maybe some things that we can change about the choices we're making to help our brains and bodies. And then lastly, we're going to talk about strategies to lessen that everyday forgetfulness. So maybe there are some things that we can work on um, to feel better about what is going on and to remember a little bit better some of the things that we tend to forget. Okay. So if we start with a cute little facetious phrase, not only is my short-term memory horrible, but so is my short-term memory. I laugh every time I read that. It's funny. It is a facetious look at short-term memory. And some people say to me, if I am among a group and I ask, what do you think short-term memory is? And someone undoubtedly says, well, it's what I have trouble with. Ask me about my childhood and I can remember anything and everything. Just don't ask me what I had for breakfast this morning. So that is a facetious way to talk about short-term memory. And yes, that person isn't exactly wrong in talking about short-term memory that way. But we are tonight going to talk about short-term memory and long-term memory as a process. So these are the types of memory that we'll talk about tonight. And you can see the far left bullets are short-term memory and long-term memory. So those are the two broad types we'll talk about. But then there, of course, are sub-bullets. You see working memory under short-term memory. It goes along with short-term memory. And then there are several different types and subtypes of long-term memory. This looks like it's complicated. It isn't. It's very easy to understand. We have under long-term memory implicit, explicit, and then two types of explicit memory, semantic and episodic. And then lastly, we'll talk about prospective memory in relation to types of memory. So let's get cooking here. As far as short-term memory is in essence, whatever you're thinking about right this second. Short-term memory is essentially one's thoughts. It is our conscious thoughts. Uh, Short-term memory storage space is extremely limited. Information stays with us briefly, and whatever one is thinking about at any given time is often replaced by another thought that stays with us briefly. So if you say or know that you have thoughts that enter your head and go out of your head all day, every day, that you have all kinds of thoughts, that is your short-term memory, because the storage space is very limited and information only stays there up to several seconds. You may have the same thoughts come through your head all day. Maybe my husband, for instance, is traveling right now, and he texted me at 1 something, and I had the dog out in the yard, and I came in 5 minutes later and texted him back, and then he didn't respond to me for 4 hours, and I was worried. So that him not answering me came to my mind very often all afternoon, like, oh, I hope he's okay. Oh, haven't heard from him, and he is fine. But the information is temporary and may not be remembered unless we store it or encode it. So short-term memories come into our short-term memory, or thoughts come into our short-term memory constantly. And what we store or encode goes to our long-term memory uh, for utilization later. Long-term memory is our storage space. As an example of short-term memory being just that, and how short-term memory will not stay there unless we encode it in long-term memory, the other day I made a phone call for work, so I was on my computer, and it was the first time in a very long time where the message, it was one of those, where it's almost like you have a wrong number, but instead of the wrong number, the message said, all circuits are busy. Please try your call again later. So of course, I tried it immediately again, and it's had the same message. Please try your call again later. So I waited 10 minutes. And of course, you can imagine what happened. 10 minutes later, I no longer remembered the number. I had to look it up again to call. So that is a good example of how short-term memory works. Information comes into our short-term memory, and unless we encode it or store it into long-term memory, we may not remember it later. Okay. Working memory is part of short-term memory. Working memory, like short-term memory, is also limited in space to store memories. Working memory is when we manipulate information in our short-term memory. So you see the picture here, and I tried to best portray a person trying to figure out a sale price in his or her head, his head, it looks like. So let's say you were in the store and you go to a rack of shirts, and the shirts are $40, but the sign says the shirts are 30% off. So write in the chat box how much the shirts cost. If they're $40 and they're 30% off, how much do they cost? How much will you pay for the shirts? Try to put the answer in the chat. We'll see who comes up with the first answer. Well, I might not be seeing the chat messages coming through. If you had $28, you were correct. Now that I asked you that because the whole process of calculating that information in your short-term memory is utilizing your working memory. If I said the phrase spring is coming, and I asked you to take that short phrase, spring is coming, and put those words in alphabetical order, doing so in your mind would be utilizing your working memory. And the answer would be coming is spring. That is spring is coming in alphabetical order, right? So that is working memory, a part of short-term memory. Now, long-term memory is more permanent. The storage space in long-term memory is absolutely vast and limitless. And information in long-term memory is transferred there because it may be deemed important information or because of repeated exposure to the information. Even though long-term memory storage space is vast and limitless, some of those memories too can fade over time. And a good example of this is, you see the birthday cake here. Everyone was born on a certain date. Mine is August 13th. So every August 13th, I have an anniversary of my birth or my birthday, my next birthday. Now you do too. Does every one of your birthdays stand out to you, or do you remember just a handful of birthdays that really stand out? For me, it's the latter. It's just a handful of birthdays that really stand out. Even though I've celebrated my birthday every year for 62 years, some of the more memorable ones do stand out to me, and I certainly can't recall every single birthday I've had. That is a good example of long-term memories not being permanent. I know I've had birthdays, but I don't remember every single one, the nuances of every single one. Another good example, I told you that long-term memories, information comes to long-term memories because it may be deemed important or because of repeated exposure. Let me ask you rhetorically, the last time you traveled and stayed in a hotel, do you remember the hotel room number today? Now, you might have traveled last week and may not be able to remember the hotel room number today. Yet, when you were staying in that hotel room, even if you stayed overnight, chances are you left the room, you went and had dinner, you came back and had to go back to the room number that you remembered. So in that time frame, you were remembering that room number, but it's information that really isn't important to you after the event is over. So chances are, even several days later, you may not remember what the room number was. That's another good example of long-term memories not necessarily always being permanent. Okay. So here are different types of long-term memory. As I showed you on the other slide, I kind of repeated it here. Retrospective memory, to me, is really just another definition for long-term memory. It's memory for past events or learned information, and that's what long-term memory is. It's retrospective. It's memory for past events or learned information. And then you see here implicit memory. Implicit memory, you see the word nonverbal after it. Implicit memory is often called body memory. It's also called procedural memory. It is a nonverbal type of long-term memory, and in essence, it's you on autopilot. Whatever you do in this life without having to think about it, you do without thinking, your brain takes care of it, is utilizing implicit memory or procedural memory. So taking a shower, signing your name, taking a bite of a sandwich, making the sandwich, driving the car, things that you do day in and day out are good examples of implicit memory, doing without necessarily having to think through every step. If I was washing my hair, I wouldn't have to think through, my hand is approaching my head. My hand is now going to, you don't have to think that way, do you? With implicit memory, you just do without thinking. And it's a wonderful, wonderful tool that we have, our brains. And implicit memory is a wonderful, wonderful type of memory, but it does have its drawbacks. Because you do things without necessarily having to think them through, you on autopilot, you may forget that you've done them. So you can take your medicine and then a few minutes later question yourself, did I take it? Was that yesterday that I took it, or did I take it already today? And that can happen, can't it? Or you can drive away only to 3 minutes later turn around and come back because you didn't remember if you closed the garage today. I do it every day. Did I close it today? Did I not close it today? So that can be the caveat or the drawback with implicit memory. Explicit memory is declarative. So explicit memory is a type of long-term memory that is brought forth in words or visualizations. Episodic and semantic are two types of explicit memory. Episodic memory, of course, the root word of episodic is episode. So episodic memory are all of the stories that you tell where you are tied somehow in some way to them. So they're the chapters of your life. They're events, they're facts, they're experiences where you personally know about them or play a part in them. So they're personally personal chapters in your life. So if you talk about a birthday, like we just mentioned 2 minutes ago, if you talk about an upcoming wedding that you're excited about, if you talk about, even if you talk about what you had for lunch today, it's your experience. So it is an example of episodic memory for you. It could be mundane, or it could be some of the most important experiences, stories we have in our lives. Those are all episodic memories. Semantic memory is acquired knowledge. It's another type of long-term memory. It is the ability to know facts. It's being good at Jeopardy, answering questions on Jeopardy, or it's knowing that Abe Lincoln was one of our presidents. It's knowing your neighbor's name. It's knowing your times tables for 7 or 8 or 9, knowing your multiplication tables. All of those things are examples of semantic memory. Okay. Now, the last type of memory I'm going to talk about is prospective memory. And prospective memory is memory for future events or tasks. In other words, it's not forgetting to remember later. So let's talk for a second about prospective memory. Prospective memory is all of the tasks that we do as humans. or we think about doing in the future. On my way home from the grocery store, I need to stop and pick up the dry cleaning. Oh, I have to return that library book. It's due tomorrow. Oh, I didn't order the birthday cake yet. Let me order the birthday cake. I need to lock the front door before I go to bed. All of these things are tasks that we intend to do at a future time. The future time could be minutes, seconds even, or the future time could be by the end of the month. Those are all prospective memory tasks. Each of us can relate to these everyday demands because we all have these demands placed on us by ourselves, typically, or by others that are counting on us. These are demands that we need to take care of, things that we are planning to do in the future. Quite simply, it's not forgetting to remember. And research does vary on whether prospective memory ability is impacted by aging. I will say it is clear that every one of us forgets sometimes. So some of the things that we are mad at ourselves for forgetting are prospective memory fails. Now, prospective memory fails when we don't do the intended task, when we forget something. They can be harmless or they can be harmful. A good example of a harmless prospective memory fail was what I just said a few minutes ago when you say, oh, I'll bring the appetizer Saturday. What would you like? Of course I'll bring it. And then you forget to bring it. Oh, the chat is working out great. Thank you. Thank you, Angel. So that's a relatively harmless prospective memory fail, isn't it? Where we might be embarrassed, but it isn't going to make or break the gathering because you left an appetizer at home. A more harmful prospective memory fail, let's say you just put soup on the stove to heat up and the doorbell rings. You go to the doorbell and it's your next door neighbor and she stands in the foyer and you talk and talk and talk and you're catching up and all of a sudden you hear the sizzle of the soup or you might smell the soup burning and you didn't really remember that you had soup on the stove until there was a cause to remember. So that could be potentially a more harmful prospective memory fail. Now, prospective memory tasks are either time-based or event-based. An example of a time-based prospective memory task is when we say, I need to take the rolls out in 15 minutes, out of the oven in 15 minutes. Or I told my sister I'd call her at 8 o'clock tonight, California time. Those are time-based intended tasks. An event-based intended task is when we're um, we're going along and some event causes us to remember. So I might leave the grocery store and I turn left and I see to my right a block ahead the post office. And it's at that moment that event caused me to remember something that I needed to do. So prospective memory tasks can be time-based or event-based. Because there are so many times where we rely on prospective memory, it isn't surprising that, like this person juggling all of the balls up in the air, it isn't surprising that every once in a while we drop a ball where we do forget because we're human. And there are ways we can try to improve prospective memory attempts so that we may fail less. And of course, that is trying to strategize and remember better by doing things to help ourselves. And we'll get into that in just a second. Are there any questions before I move on to brain health contributors just for a couple of minutes?
Molly, we do have a few questions. This is Sarah.
Okay.
In the Q&A, one is what lifestyle changes can help improve memory? You may be getting to that later.
I'm getting to that. We will talk about strategies at the end.
Okay.
And this, as far as brain health contributors, these are things, behavior changes that you can make, or you may do some of these things. And tonight you may realize these things are helpful for my brain. So, but we will talk about tips to remember better toward the end of the program.
Very good. And the other question is, are there any medications that can affect memory?
That I cannot get into because as an educator with the University of Illinois Extension, I stay in my lane. So I'm not a medical doctor and I do not entertain any kind of questions related to medicines, or sometimes people will ask, I've heard that this supplement is good or this herb is good, or those kinds of things I don't answer. But I do suggest absolutely you jot that down in the next visit with your doctor. Ask your doctor and see, and you'll get the best answer that way.
Fair enough. Thank you, Molly. And that's what
Sure.
we have for now. Carry on.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, last month, if you were with me, we talked about what contributes to brain health throughout life. And it's not rocket science, it's very simple. These are the 6 pillars of brain health. Researchers call them the pillars of brain health. They also call them lifestyle contributing factors. So these things done, especially together for optimal benefit, are things that we should be doing every day in order to take care of our bodies as well as our brains. So it's quality sleep, getting a good night's sleep, 7 to 8 hours of good sleep every night. And if, of course, every one of us occasionally will have a poor night's sleep, but if you have more than occasional poor night's sleep and sleep is troublesome for you, of course, talk with your doctor about it to see what can happen. We did also talk about good sleep hygiene, some things we can do to try to get a more restful sleep, like having a cool, dark, quiet, comfortable room, eliminating electronics from the bedroom. Some people like to have the TV on to lull them to sleep if it doesn't bother you and you get a good night's sleep. I'm not going to tell you to fix what works for you, but maybe taking a bath before bed. You know your routine, and every one of us winds down at night, and we know when we're preparing for sleep. So try to avoid some of the things that keep you jazzed. Try to avoid caffeine late in the day. Try to avoid exercise late in the day. Those are some things that help. A heart healthy diet is a brain healthy diet. So simply put, what is good for your heart is good for your brain. What you feed your body to help your heart, a good healthy diet is what you also are doing to help your brain. So whole grains, lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, water. I'm just giving examples. Not it's none of this is all inclusive, just examples. I think it's always a safe bet that as adults, we've all heard about heart healthy diets or what diets are good for us, right? Exercise for adults, the recommendation is 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity. So doing things to get your heart pumping, to get your oxygen flowing, get the blood flowing. Um, and it could be everyday things. It could be mopping your kitchen floor. It could be vacuum, doing house cleaning. I certainly work up a sweat when I'm cleaning the house, or walking outside and trying to walk more or quicken your pace and build up. If you're trying to build up your exercise regime, stand behind your chair during commercial breaks and march in place. Uh, Park a little further away when you go out to the stores or to church or wherever you're going. So exercise is great, 150 minutes per week that can be, of course, broken up into chunks of time. Managing our stress. We all experience stress. We have good stressors, we have negative stressors, but we all have stress in our lives, and you need a bit of stress in your life as a power boost, as to get us motivated to move. But prolonged stress, too much negative stress for a prolonged period of time is not good for anyone. So we need to find positive ways to manage our stress. Um, and that can be through lots of things I just said, right? Getting good, better sleep, eating better, exercising, meditation. People talk about prayer. People talk about talking things over with a good friend or with a professional, uh, finding ways to manage that stress, manage the stress we face day in and day out. Social connections vital to brain health, staying in that game of social life, uh, making time with friends and with family, whether it's virtually, in person, making new friendships through participating at programs at the library, all kinds of connections. And the connections all don't all carry the same weight, right? We have our close family connections and then we have acquaintances. All of them are important for us as far as our social connections factors. And the last pillar of brain health is to challenge yourselves intellectually. And here we are tonight. You're learning about what you can do for brain health. You're challenging yourselves intellectually. It's a library program. Your library patrons, you challenge yourselves intellectually. The key, though, are two things. Do things you enjoy. So if you enjoy reading, continue that. If you enjoy woodworking, continue that. If you enjoy anything creative, do it. Do things you enjoy. And the second factor, take it up a notch. You want to break that mental sweat. So if you do the New York Times crossword puzzle every morning, great, because it does get harder, I think, as the week goes on. If you are an avid reader and love to read, try a book that you've shied away from. If you love to crochet, try a pattern that you've shied away from. Take it up a notch and continue to increase that intellectual challenge. Try new things. Do something new. Learn a new dance step, if that's your thing. Or if you're exercising, try a different type of exercise where you have to coordinate a little bit more. Very, very good for the noggin. Okay. So these are brain health contributors. Now we'll move on. I'm going to take a little drink because I can feel myself fading here. I'm talking too much. Now we'll move on to forgetfulness contributors. So when we think in terms of not remembering the ordinary things, or maybe the ordinary reasons why we are all forgetful, that we all have episodes of forgetfulness, it has to do with input and output, the fact that we're human, we should start there, frankly, and the environment, what is going on around us. And as far as input, I think you know what I'm going to be talking about, not paying attention. We as humans are masters at looking like we are hanging on one's every word. We're masters at looking like we're in it to win it, paying attention. If we were all in the same room right now, some of you would be hanging on my every word, and some of you might be thinking, oh, maybe we should get ice cream on the way home. The same is true here virtually. You might be hanging on my every word, or you might have, if someone in the family is in the other room and you can hear them talking on the phone. So you're kind of paying attention to me and kind of paying attention to what's on television, or for any reason, input is a forgetfulness contributor, or I should say trouble with input. So if information isn't coming in wholly and completely, how are we remembering it wholly and completely? If we're half listening, we're not remembering 100%. And like me, you probably have been caught half listening before. Um, my husband will say things to me sometimes. Don't you remember we were at the restaurant? It was there that I told you this. You were sitting across from me. You ordered the pancakes. And he remembers every single thing about when he told me something, and I don't remember it. And I was probably paying attention to maybe someone sitting at the table next to me, or I was distracted in some way. So a lot of times we half listen because we're distracted. Sometimes we may have trouble hearing. So we're only taking in every third or fourth word. So if you're not taking information in fully, how do you remember it fully? So that has to do with input uh, as a cause for forgetfulness. Output is also a cause for forgetfulness. The ability to recall information um, can change as we grow older. Recall is one of the more natural, noticeable changes associated with aging. So if you feel today that you have that tip of the tongue feeling more than you did when you were a kid, where you think, oh, I know the name of that restaurant. Oh, it begins with an R. Oh, remember it's on such and such street. If you have those kinds of episodes, and I know you do because I do too, that happens more frequently as we grow older because there is a change in recall. Recall slows as we age. It doesn't mean you don't recall. It sometimes means that you may not recall information right when you need it. So if you watch shows like Jeopardy, like me, and you have the remote control in your hand, and sometimes you need to pause so you can think of the answer without them giving the answer, that is what I'm talking about. Recall does slow it. It comes, but it may not come when we need it. And if you're more anxious about it, you may have trouble in that moment. And the example I always give, let's say you're at the grocery store and you're shopping with your brother, and at the other end of the aisle turns the corner. The person that turns the corner is your neighbor of 30 years, three doors down. And you already see the neighbor, you're already waving, and you want to tell your brother, don't ask me her name. I don't remember it right now, but you can't. We've all been in that situation where you think, oh my goodness, what is her name? What is her name? And you know her name almost like you know yourself, but it's just not coming to you in that second because you were caught by surprise. We've all been in those situations where it's we want that information in that second and it's just not coming. You might get home with the groceries, you put the groceries away, you sit down, have a cup of tea with your brother, and it's then that the neighbor's name comes to you. It just happens sometimes. Sometimes I could be thinking about something, and then as when I lay my head on the pillow, what I was thinking about earlier will come to me. It just when you're more relaxed, I think that can help the information come to you. So that is output, input and output. Having that tip of the tongue feeling, that is another age-related memory change that happens to all of us. The fact that we're human, there are certainly human considerations for why we forget. We may have great intentions to remember, and then we don't. You may have even said things like, oh, I don't need to write it down. Don't worry, I won't forget it. And then you forget it. Uh, I once at 10 o'clock at night was prompted, I was on my work iPad and I was prompted to change the password. And I had to change it. It was a 6-digit numbered password. And I had to change it in that minute because it wouldn't let me use the iPad until I changed it. So I changed it thinking, oh, I'll remember that tomorrow. And believe it or not, I never remembered it again. I did not write the password down and did not remember it. So we have great intentions as humans, and because we're human, we don't always remember, even when we think we will. Other human considerations, would anyone like to put in the chat? What are some other human reasons why we would forget? Anybody? What can be going on in our lives that can cause us to not remember as well? I did give one of them away a minute ago, sensory deficits. If you have trouble with vision or trouble with hearing, sometimes that can cause you not to take information in fully. Absolutely, multitasking. We'll talk about multitasking. Multitasking actually takes longer than doing one task at a time. So multitasking is a giant reason for dropping a ball or two. Organizing, right? or lack of organization sometimes can be a reason for a human consideration for forgetfulness, right? And sometimes organizing can be a reason for forgetting too. If you've recently cleaned out a drawer or put things away, you sometimes forget where you put things. Getting too many introductions, yes, we'll talk about names in a second. Of course, taking care of family members, and it does cause stress, doesn't it? And stress is a culprit. Stress can cause us to drop a ball or two and forget. Monkey brain. Yes. Yes, we have too much going on as humans. Other concerns or other considerations, health concerns. There are some medical concerns that are going on that may cause problems with forgetfulness a little bit. Sickness, if a person is sick or in pain, you know what that is like. If you have a bad headache, for instance, if I have a terrible headache, I can't really think very well. It's very difficult to when even thinking seems to bother me. So substance use can be a problem or a human consideration. Medication side effects. If you have a medication that says do not operate heavy machinery or may cause drowsiness, those are certainly considerations, aren't they, for maybe forgetting something or not being as aware. Emotional worries or stressors was also mentioned. Very good. There is also what we call misremembering. Memory is imperfect, and sometimes we fill in incomplete or missing pieces in our memory or our stories. In other words, the fish does get bigger every time we tell the story. So that can be a forgetfulness contributor. If you tell the same story over and over again, have you ever been in a situation where you're telling a story and maybe someone who loves you says something like, well, I don't know where you were, but that's not exactly how I heard or how I remember that story. So they have a different version of that story. And now you know their version as well. So the next time you tell the story, you might include their version too. So um, we are human. So we misremember at times or fill in those pieces of memory. Big thing is losing track of a conversation when you're talking with someone that happens. Oh, it happens to me too. Have you ever said something to someone else? What was I just going to say? What was I going to say? I do that all the time, expecting that the person is going to, oh, well, you were going to say this. Um, but it's filler when I lose my place in conversation or something was so important. Sometimes I'm waiting for the person to stop talking so that I will say something and then I forget what I was going to say. But we'll talk about waiting to talk to as a strategies for trying to really remember better. All right, and then the last consideration is environmental. What is going on around us that can cause us to be distracted? And that is really the key. And as far as environmental causes, it's typically distraction. So if you're in a room right now that is 97 degrees, you're probably not hanging on my every word. You're distracted by being too warm. One time I gave a brain health talk on Navy Pier up in the Riva restaurant, I think it's called, something like that. And down below on the pier, a construction worker was using a jackhammer the entire time I was giving a talk. So I'm sure the audience was certainly not hanging on my every word. I wasn't even hanging on my every word and giving the presentation. So distractions, interruptions, noise, temperature, all of these things can be cause for distracting and then not remembering well. All right, so we talked about some of the contributors. So if much of what we forget is due to prospective memory fails or things we intend to do and then don't do, if staying focused, paying attention can be a problem for forgetting if we're not always in it to win it because we're distracted or oftentimes we're distracted by our own thoughts. I look like I'm hanging on your every word, but I'm thinking of something else. And then recall. Recall is a natural, noticeable change associated with memory and aging. Let's talk about strategies to assist with these three things. So if we start with prospective memory, I'm just checking the time here. Okay. If we start with prospective memory, you see this poster. Let's say you're in an airport in Germany and you only speak English. So this poster has words written all over it that are in German, but potentially you know what this means because this is kind of a universal symbol for don't forget, right? A string tied in a bow around a finger is kind of that I don't forget, or here's an idea, or I need to remember. So this string did not grow on that finger. This string was put on that finger on purpose in order to remember something else. And this is called an environmental change or a purposeful change. So one way to remember an intended task is by doing something on purpose in order to remember later. And you probably do things to help you remember later. Would anyone like to give an example of a purposeful change, something you do on purpose to remember a task later? Anybody? And you can put it in the chat or you can say it out loud if you can unmute yourselves. Making a list, absolutely. Leaving a post-it note, yes. A lot of people tell me they put post-it notes on the bathroom mirror so that when they're getting ready the next morning, they remember. Writing on your hand. Take a picture. That's a good one. All of these things that you're saying are good as the person who looks at these things again, right? So if you take a picture looking at that picture, if you have the post-it note looking at it again, all excellent examples. Writing on your hand. In the olden days, before all cell phones, people would tell me that they would leave a voicemail message on their home phone so that when they got home, they would play their voicemail messages and they'd remember then. Same is true for your cell phone. Put your keys on top of something you want to remember to bring. Excellent. Um, Sometimes people will say, you know, I put whatever I need to do the next day on the front seat of my car. So when I get in the car, I remember the tasks that I need to complete. Use a calendar on your phone. Excellent. And that can give you reminders too, can't it? Which are great. Can give you auditory reminders. So that's wonderful. My husband, he's retired now, but when he worked, he would put the keys on top of the leftovers in the refrigerator. So the next morning he would remember to bring his lunch. He would have to go into the refrigerator to get his keys and the lunch. So that's my number one example that I always give when I teach this lesson because I thought it was really a wonderful tactic that he used. So that is making an environmental change, doing something in order to help yourself remember something later. Now, the best thing you can do, if possible, is don't put off the task to begin with. If you can complete the task in the moment, do so. So if I say, oh, I'm going to move the wastebasket into the middle of the family room floor, so I remember to call Elaine tonight at 8 o'clock. If I can call Elaine at 4 o'clock while I'm standing there and take care of business right there, don't put it off. In other words, if you can finish the task without putting it off, complete it as you remember it. Okay? Then assuredly you won't forget. All right. The second strategy we'll work on is staying focused on being focused. So if you're human, you have probably had at least one instance in your life where you looked at a parking lot like this and you panicked because you didn't remember exactly where you parked the car. Now, this is kind of an exaggerated example, but I certainly have been guilty in shopping malls at holiday time, forgetting. One time I forgot even which store I entered at the shopping mall and needed to take a ride in the security car to find my car. That was the last time I didn't strategize to remember better. But we all have problems with paying attention. Sometimes we think we're paying attention and then we really aren't. And it sounds so simple, just pay better attention. But we're masters at not necessarily paying attention. So we do make mistakes like some of the things I said to start. Did I let the dog back in before I left? So we have to turn around and go look. Did I close the garage door? Most of the time, when you do have these episodes of, oh, where did I park this car? It's because we were operating on autopilot. We were operating on procedural memory, going about our day, going about our business. So we weren't in the moment when we needed to be. We were taking care of business using procedural memory, our autopilot. The same is true when you meet someone for the first time and they say their name and not 20 seconds later, you can't remember what the name was of the person. And sometimes you'll say, I'm sorry, would you tell me your name again? And sometimes we don't. Sometimes we let it go, don't we? Because we may not want to say, I didn't remember your name. And the reason why we don't typically remember the name is because we are creatures of habit. We exchange salutations. Someone says, "Hi, I'm Mary," and "Hi, I'm Molly." You are so you so naturally take care of your response that you didn't take in what was said to you because your response is so automated, so procedural. So that is a big reason why we don't remember names in the first place. And it sounds really silly, but it is something that needs practice in order to make it better. So in order to make it better, when someone says their name or work on it, when you're talking to anyone, or even when you introduce people or you're being introduced, try to take in the person's name, make an association if you can, a rhyme if you can, whatever comes to mind. But in the next minute, in talking with that person, try to say their name again, at least one more time. If you verbalize it by saying it back to the person, it reinforces that recognition of the name. And chances are you may remember the name a bit longer. Chances are, if you see the person again the next week at church, for instance, you may remember the person's name. It is something to practice. If names is a problem for you, and it might be because it is the most common response when people are asked, oh, what is it that you have trouble remembering? Names is the most common response. So giving the conversation your full attention takes practice. And I wish I had a better strategy for you, but it absolutely does take practice. So I guess my strategy would be to practice hanging on someone's every word. Maybe the next time you have lunch with a friend or you call someone on the telephone, try to listen to absolutely everything they're saying. And then when they stop talking, give your response. It's stilted and it seems unnatural because naturally we back and forth banter, but that will give you a demonstration of what it takes to pay full attention to somebody. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that the rest of your lives, but that will give you a good idea about how to work on paying attention. And and I'm just making the assumption that perhaps you don't always pay attention simply because most of us don't always pay attention all the time. Because you can be distracted by a dog bark, you can be distracted by something else, you can be distracted by music on the television, or anything can distract you. Okay, so that is, oops, we're going to do a brief little activity. And here's where your pen and paper will come in handy. If you number your paper 1 to 16, just quickly, or know that there are 16 items, I am going to show you, you kind of saw it a little bit as I advanced the slide. There's a kind of a still picture with all kinds of things in the picture, puzzle pieces and other things. I am going to give you 1 minute to look at the picture And I want you to stay focused on it and really work on trying to remember everything that's in the picture. There are 16 items. So try to remember as many of the items as you can in the picture. And then after 1 minute, I'm going to take the picture away, and it's then that you can write down the items. So the first minute, you're not writing anything down. You're just trying to take in the picture and remember what is in it. And then when I say, now write your answers down, then you can, for 1 more minute, I'll give you 1 minute to write down as many things that you remember about what was in the picture. Okay, all 16 items if you can. You won't be able to, most people don't, but and then I don't think anyone ever has, in fact, and I've taught this many, many, many times. And then I'll show you the answers. Okay, so it's a 3-minute activity. So if everybody's ready, I'm going to show you the picture. You'll have 1 minute to memorize it, to look at everything that's in the picture. I'll say stop, and then you'll have 1 minute to write down everything you remember being in the picture. Okay? So here is the picture. I'll be quiet so you can remember.
Are we supposed to be seeing it, Molly?
Yes, can you see it?
I can't.
Can anybody else see it?
Oh, yes, it looks like everybody else can except me.
Oh, okay,
So
good.
that's good.
Good, 10 more seconds.
Never mind.
I'm glad. Okay, everyone, now I'm going to let you write down everything you remember from the picture. I'll give you 1 minute to do so.
And you want everyone to write down, Molly, on a piece of paper?
Right, right. They numbered their papers 1 to 16 and just write
Mhm.
down what you remember.
So one of our attendees said, I can see it. Should we post them here? But you said just write them down.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Just write them down, or you can put them in the chat, but then everybody sees your answers.
That's right. This is a fun game. I love these. Thank you.
It's just a recall practice. Okay, now I'm going to put the picture up again and you can compare your answers to the picture and see how well you fared. I'm sure you did this as a kid too, where you had to remember all kinds of memory games. This, I did this though for you to focus, to increase your focus and attention and try to increase your recall through total focus and attention. It's kind of fun. Is there anybody who wants to put in the chat the number that you remembered, the number of items? I don't think I have the chat now. Oh, here it is. Ooh, 11. Hey, that's good. 5, good. Hey, this wasn't a true test because normally if we were together, I probably would give you 2 minutes to try to remember and then 2 minutes to write them down. So, oh, 12 of 15, great. Excellent. Very good. This is something you can do even if you're sitting wasting time in the doctor's office, you can look at a magazine and let's say you see an ad for coffee. You could look at, and let's say the ad is pretty vivid of someone sitting in a family room or, with a fireplace and whatever it is, you can look at the ad and try to, for 1 minute, give yourself a minute to try to remember everything in the ad and then turn the page and then in your own mind, try to recall some of the things that you remember. That is working on your focus and your recall. Something that I didn't tell you when we were just talking about focus a second ago, uh, I've mentioned procedural memory a couple of times, you on autopilot, and one way to remember better when you are doing things on autopilot, like um, turning on the coffee. So you leave the house and you think, did I turn off the coffee pot? Which isn't a problem for most people anymore because of the auto shut off. But, did I turn off the stove? Did I? All of these things that we question about ourselves because we're doing without thinking. We're working on procedural memory. I ask that you disengage your autopilot or procedural memory by talking to yourself. I'm giving you permission to talk to yourself. So using the garage door as an example, the next time if it is a problem for you where sometimes you do have to go back home to see if you close the garage, I want you to start when you back out of the garage. I want you to stop the car. And as you are watching the garage door go down, I want you to say, um, it's a cool Monday morning. I'm watching the garage door go down. And just by talking out loud, you've disengaged autopilot, obviously, because now you are thinking about what you're doing. So that is one strategy to help if you are that person that thinks, oh, did I? And you feel almost unsettled unless you go back and look. And sometimes you don't go back and sometimes you do. That is one good way to take yourself out of autopilot and talk out loud. And I guarantee you, if you do that, you won't forget that you'll remember that you talk to yourself out loud. Okay. All right. The last activity we're going to do together is a recall activity. Even though this was a picture recall, recall is something that you can do anywhere. And I told you it is one of the more noticeable changes that we experience as far as memory and aging. So you can um, work on recall. You could sit at a red light and work on recall. Anything that you can list in your mind, you can work on recalling that information. So if you're at a red light and you think, okay, at this light, I'm going to think of as many names as I can that begin with the letter M, as in Mary, until the light turns green. So in your mind, you're thinking Melvin, Marie, Michael, Morgan, Molly, Mary, uh, Maria. And I'm telling you, it will come to you very quickly at first, but it's when you're starting to think, oh, what's another one? What's another one? That's when you're really working on recall. And you could do that every time you get to a light. You could do it the whole time you're driving if you want to. But anything you can list, you can work on recall. So our last activity for the evening, we are going to do a quick recall activity. So if you'll number your paper from 1 to 10, I'm going to give you something to list. So let's see. I want you to list 15 bodies, or no, I said 10. So 10 bodies of water. It could be Lake Michigan, it could anything. 10 bodies of water. And you have a minute to do so. If you do more than 10, keep on going. Okay, for purposes of time, I'm going to cut you short, but I want you to work on this tonight. Maybe you thought of 5 or 6 already. So keep on, let your list go long. It's when you're really searching for the next answer that you're really working on recall. So that is a good exercise for recall. And it could be magazine titles, it could be book titles, board games, anything you can list, you can work on recall. And I love Burju's response in the chat. He said, he or she, I'm sorry, I don't know. A good exercise is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. That is a mindfulness meditation exercise where you focus on 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things. It requires your total focus in thinking of these things. And it's a very, very good exercise for recall and for mindfulness and stress management. So thank you for that example. Excellent example. Okay. The last thing I'm going to leave with you, and I'm sorry we went 5 minutes over, 4 additional strategies. And the first one, Sarah mentioned already, don't multitask. From a research standpoint, multitasking can take longer than doing tasks individually one at a time. So again, I'm not going to tell you to fix what isn't broken. If you can fold towels and talk on the phone and keep track of what's on television all at the same time, don't fix what isn't broken. But if you need total attention when you're paying your bills or doing something else that requires your mind to really be working, know when and when not to multitask. Keep a pen and paper handy or use a calendar. And when you have a pen and paper handy, I like to tell people to, if you buy a couple of steno pads, keep them handy where you do your most work. So let's say um, next to your chair in the family room. You jot a lot of things down or do things, or let's say in a drawer in the kitchen because you sit at the kitchen table sometimes and jot things down, or at a desk. If you keep only 1 or 2 steno pads handy and only write your notes in either of those, you'll know where to go look for your notes. So you don't do things like I used to do, like, oh, I think I wrote it on something yellow. Well, what did I write it on? Keep your notes only in 1 or 2 steno pads to know where you have your information. Ask for a reminder. Of course, you can set any kind of reminder. We talked about cell phone alarms and stove alarms. You can ask anyone. I think children are the best at certain ages of children are the best at giving you a reminder. If you say, hey, remind me at 7 o'clock to do this, chances are you might get that reminder, but there's nothing wrong with being asked to be reminded. And this is what I just talked about 5 minutes ago. Try every once in a while to hang on someone's every word. Try to be that active listener where you really take all information in before you speak and try to hear everything the person is saying before you respond. It takes great practice. It's not a communication tool that most of us really use because we're usually trying to think of our answer as the other person is talking. So just try that and see what happens as far as active listening and total focus and attention. And that's it. We talked about different types of memory. We talked a little bit about those brain health contributors, and we talked about some helpful hints. And I'll turn it back over to Sarah if anyone has any questions or.
Molly, we do have a few questions. I know we've already gone a bit over, but can you see the questions or would you like me to read them?
I think you might need to read them because I don't see
Oh,
them.
okay. Do
Oh,
you
I see.
do
I
you want to
see.
stop sharing your screen
Yeah,
and so we
I
can
see some of them
view?
now.
Yeah, it looks like maybe one attendee has come up with a lot of questions about sleep for better memory, a lot asking for advice on folks who have ADHD and struggle with memory in the workforce and everyday life. You can see them.
Mhm.
A lot of them
The
seem
question
related.
on ADHD, it's kind of like some of those other medically based questions that I I don't have that kind of credential to answer. So I really wish I could help you with that. But obviously, there are many different other experts who can help you with that.
So
Uh,
best to just talk to your healthcare provider
absolutely.
for
Absolutely.
questions on
And
ADHD.
I'm sorry, I just don't know how to answer, I don't have an answer for that, but
Sure, sure.
best
Well,
of luck as you continue that search.
yeah,
Um,
we had some nice comments about enjoying the activities that you gave us and thanking you for your presentation.
oh, good.
And and there's one more, so you can tune in on Monday, April 7th, everybody, for part 3, the last part of the brain health series. And that one is called Two Heads Are Better Than One.
Mhm.
And you want to give us a real quick preview, Molly, of
Well,
what that one's about?
in that presentation, I focus on the importance of staying socially connected. So we delve into that a little bit more, but again, it's more of the same where we do all kinds of activities together. I think that one even has more activities than tonight's session. So yeah, more fun, but we'll talk about staying in this game of life, staying connected together because that's vital to brain health.
It's huge, isn't it? And I think as we
Very
age,
huge.
it gets very, very important because a lot of folks isolate and it's very,
Right.
very rough on a person
Right.
to
And it's,
not have others.
social isolation and loneliness has had a lot of play since the pandemic. It has always been an issue, and 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 a risk for older persons who may become more isolated by being more homebound. However, it is really the eyes have been opened since the pandemic for all of us. So between now and then, if you want to, um, as extra credit, you can read Dr. Vivek Murthy's book called Together. You probably have it at the library.
I'm sure we do.
Our former Surgeon General. I don't know if he's still the Surgeon General under the new administration, but wrote the book Together based on research on social isolation and loneliness, and it's a fantastic read. It's um, it's it's very interesting from a research perspective, but also very interesting to read and with a lot of human stories. So
I think that topic is really more important than maybe it's ever been with all the
absolutely.
distractions we have and the social media and the
Right.
screens distracting us so much.
Absolutely.
But oh,
Absolutely.
Luann said Dr. Vivek Murray.
Murthy, Murthy.
Very good. Okay. And
Mhm.
Burju said, thank you, Molly and Sarah, for hosting such a great event. We're grateful to have a great library. Yay. Thanks, Burju.
Yes, good
Angel says,
library for
thank
sure.
you. We sure appreciate you. Thanks for giving us a little extra time tonight. And we look forward to more activities and learning about staying engaged in next
Yes.
session. So again, April 7th, another first Monday of the month, part 3, two heads are better than one. And thanks
Okay.
everybody for attending tonight. This will be available on our library's YouTube channel in just a couple of days. So look for it then if you know anybody that would like to watch this. So thanks again, and everyone have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. And Darian, I read your message. Thank you for that. I love it. Yes. Very, very good.
Out loud.
It helps. It
Yes.
helps.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thanks again, everybody. Good
Take
night.
care.